Ma'am, who are you? What are you doing in this house?
This is my home. What's the problem, officers?
We got reports. Need your ID now.
On what legal basis? Do you have a warrant?
Your attitude is making this suspicious. Cooperative citizens don't ask questions.
I'm exercising my constitutional rights in my own home.
That's it. We're coming in to verify you belong here.
What happened next would send two officers to federal prison for a combined 10 years, cost the city $3 million in settlement, and expose a police department's darkest secrets. The body camera footage from that Tuesday morning captured every illegal entry, every racial slur, and every constitutional violation. But here's what makes this case different from every other police misconduct story you have heard. The woman they targeted wasn't just any homeowner. She was a federal judge who knew exactly what they were doing and had the power to make sure they paid for every second of it. If you're watching from anywhere in the United States, you need to see how this ends. Subscribe now because the verdict in this case changed police training nationwide, and you don't want to miss what happened when these officers realized who they just racially profiled in her own home. Judge Patricia Williams wasn't supposed to be home that Tuesday morning. At 62 years old, she had spent the last decade serving as a federal judge appointed during the previous administration. Before that, she'd worked 10 years as a prosecutor handling cases that ranged from white-collar fraud to civil rights violations. But none of that mattered at 7:15 a.m. when she returned from her morning jog. She lived on a quiet street where neighbors knew each other by name. Not the fancy colonial houses you see in magazines, just solid brick homes with front porches and small yards. She'd moved here 5 years ago after her husband passed, wanting something manageable. The neighbors had welcomed her. She helped Mrs. Chen next door with groceries when her hip was bad. She organized the annual block party every July. That morning was routine. She jogged her usual 3 miles, waved to the mailman, and was looking forward to her coffee before heading to the courthouse. She had 2 sentencing hearings that afternoon and wanted to review the files one more time. Nothing about her life suggested drama. She went to work, came home, attended church on Sundays, and video called her daughter in Atlanta every Wednesday evening. She was exactly the kind of person who believed the system worked. Officer Daniel Reeves had been on the force for 18 years. At 40, he'd worked this neighborhood long enough to recognize who belonged and who didn't, or so he thought. When he spotted the black woman in athletic wear jogging through the tree-lined streets that Tuesday morning, something triggered in his mind. He'd seen her before maybe once or twice, but it never sat right with him. This neighborhood was different now. Property values were up. Young families were moving in. People who looked like people who belonged. He radioed his partner, Marcus Thompson, with a story he'd tell a dozen times before the day was over. Got a suspicious person report on Maple Street. Black female, early 60s, athletic build, seen entering and exiting a residence multiple times. The problem was simple. No such report existed. Thompson, 42, had worked with Reeves for 6 years. He knew the drill. When Reeves called something in, you backed him up. Questions came later, if at all. They'd done this before. Stop someone, check ID. Make sure they had a reason to be there. Usually people got nervous and left. Sometimes they got an arrest for outstanding warrants or disorderly conduct. The 2 cruisers pulled into Judge Williams' driveway at exactly 7:23 a.m. Reeves approached the front door firsthand, resting on his belt near his service weapon. Thompson positioned himself slightly behind and to the left, a tactical stance they'd practiced hundreds of times. The knock was hard, authoritative, the kind of knock that says this isn't a friendly visit. When Judge Williams opened the door, still in her silk robe with a coffee mug in hand, she expected maybe a neighbor or a package delivery. Instead, she found herself staring at 2 uniformed officers who looked at her like she was trespassing in her own home. "Ma'am, we need to see some identification." Officer Reeves didn't ask. He stated. His hand remained on his belt, fingers drumming near his holster. Thompson shifted his weight, blocking the view of the street. Judge Williams paused. She'd spent decades in courtrooms watching interrogations ruling on police conduct cases. She knew exactly what was happening here. But in that moment, she made a calculated decision. Don't reveal who you are. Not yet. Is there a problem, officers? Her voice was calm, but her heart was racing. We received reports of suspicious activity at this address, Reeves said. Need to verify you have authorization to be here. This is my home. What specific activity was reported? The question hung in the air. Reeves and Thompson exchanged a glance. They hadn't prepared for someone who asked back. Someone matching your description was seen entering and leaving at odd hours. Thompson added, his tone growing harder. We need to establish you're not trespassing. Judge Williams felt a familiar weight of being questioned in her own space. She'd heard stories like this her entire life. Her father, a postal worker, had been stopped 3 times walking home from work in uniform. Her brother was pulled over for driving suspiciously in his own neighborhood. But she had something they didn't. She knew the law. And she knew that the moment these officers stepped out of line, everything would be on record. Do you have a warrant? She asked simply. Reeves's jaw tightened. Your attitude is making this suspicious, ma'am. Cooperative citizens don't ask so many questions. I'm simply exercising my constitutional rights in my own home. That's when Reeves made the mistake that would end his career. He pushed past her and walked inside without permission. Judge Williams stated clearly, you're entering my home without my consent and without a warrant. Reeves had already crossed the threshold, Thompson following close behind. She reached for her phone on the hallway table in hurry to document what was happening. The moment her hand touched the device, Reeves lunged forward. Put that down, he barked, snatching the phone from her grasp. The device flew across the room, clattering against the hardwood floor near the kitchen entrance. What neither officer knew was that 6 months earlier, after a series of break-ins in nearby neighborhoods, Judge Williams had installed a security system. Not the basic doorbell camera that so many homeowners relied on, but a comprehensive setup with cameras covering her front porch, living room, and kitchen. High-definition video with crystal-clear audio. Every angle was being recorded. Every word they spoke was being captured. And most importantly, everything was automatically uploading to cloud storage in real time. Thompson began moving through her living room, opening drawers in the side table, rifling through the mail on her coffee table. We need to verify you have a right to be here, he said, though his actions had nothing to do with verification and everything to do with intimidation. Judge Williams stood near her front door, watching 2 armed men violate her constitutional rights in her own home. She could have ended it right there. She could have told them who she was, but she wanted to see how far they would go. She wanted to see exactly how they treated someone they believed had no power, no recourse, no ability to fight back. The search continued for several minutes. Reeves opened her coat closet, checked behind the coats, even looked inside the boots lined up on the floor. Who else lives here? He demanded. Just me, she answered calmly. And what do you do that lets you afford a place like this? The question hung in the air, loaded with implication. She didn't answer. She simply watched as they continued their illegal search, mentally cataloging every violation, every moment that would matter later. Then Reeves's tone shifted. His partner had found nothing because there was nothing to find, and that seemed to frustrate him more than if they'd discovered something incriminating. You people, he started, and Judge Williams felt her stomach tighten. She knew what was coming. You people move into neighborhoods like this, and everybody wonders how you're paying for it. What are you really doing? Selling drugs got some man paying your bills. The words hit like physical blows, but Judge Williams kept her face neutral. She'd heard variations of this her entire life. The assumption that Black success must be illegitimate, that achievement must be explained by something criminal or immoral. Thompson laughed, a short, bitter sound. Probably both, he added. That's usually how it works in these situations. For 20 minutes they continued, searching her belongings, making comments about people who didn't know their place, suggesting that the real homeowner would be contacted and told about the suspicious woman trying to break into their house. Judge Williams stood there asking only one question repeatedly. "May I have your badge numbers, please?" Neither officer provided them. Instead, they grew more aggressive with each request, as if her calm persistence was somehow an act of defiance that needed to be punished. She thought about her daughter Sarah, 28 years old, practicing law in Atlanta. She thought about her grandson Marcus, just 5 years old, who loved wearing his little suit jacket when he visited because he wanted to look like grandma when she went to work. Would they be safe in this world? Would Sarah face this kind of treatment despite her law degree and her professional success? Would Marcus grow up having to prove he belonged in spaces where his presence was questioned? The thought made her chest tight, but she pushed the emotion down. There would be time for that later. Right now, she needed to stay focused. Every second of this encounter was being recorded, and she needed to ensure that her own conduct remained beyond reproach. Reeves finally seemed satisfied that there was nothing to find. He walked back to where Judge Williams stood near the entrance, his face flushed with frustration. "If I ever see you in this neighborhood again," he said, his voice low and threatening, "you'll be arrested for trespassing. We're going to contact the actual homeowner and let them know what happened here today." That's when Judge Williams made her move. She walked calmly to her home office just off the living room. Both officers watched her, uncertain what she was doing. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a leather credential case. She returned to the living room and placed it on the coffee table, opening it so both officers could see clearly. Her federal judge credentials stared back at them. The gold badge, the identification card with her photo, and the seal of the federal court system. Her name, the Honorable Patricia Williams, United States District Court Judge. The color drained from Reeves' face so quickly it was almost comical. Thompson took an involuntary step backward, his hand reaching for the door frame as if he needed something to steady himself. Neither man spoke. Neither man seemed able to form words. Judge Williams finally broke the silence, her voice still calm, but now carrying the full weight of her authority. "Everything that happened here this morning has been recorded. Every illegal entry, every unconstitutional search, every word you spoke. It's all captured on my home security system, and it's already uploaded to cloud storage." She paused, letting that information sink in. "I will be filing complaints with the FBI Civil Rights Division, the Department of Justice, your police department's Internal Affairs Division, and every relevant oversight body. This will happen before noon today." Reeves opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Thompson had gone pale, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. "You may leave now," Judge Williams said, "and I suggest you contact your union representative and an attorney. You're going to need both." The two officers practically stumbled over each other in their rush to exit her home. She watched through her front window as they got into their patrol cars, sat for a moment in what appeared to be stunned silence, then drove away. Only when they were out of sight did Judge Williams allow herself to feel the full impact of what had just happened. Her hands were shaking, her heart was pounding. She sat down on her couch and took several deep breaths. Then she picked up her phone from where Reeves had thrown it. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. She pulled up her contacts and found the direct number for the FBI's Civil Rights Division. Time to make sure this never happened to anyone else. Special Agent Maria Santos answered on the second ring. Judge Williams identified herself and provided a brief account of what had occurred. Santos, a 20-year veteran who had handled dozens of civil rights cases, asked Judge Williams to stay where she was. She would be there within 2 hours with a technical specialist and a prosecutor from the DOJ. This wasn't standard protocol, but then again, it wasn't every day that a federal judge was racially profiled and illegally searched in her own home. Santos arrived 90 minutes later with David Chen, a federal prosecutor who specialized in police misconduct cases. They spent the next 4 hours reviewing the security footage, taking detailed statements, and documenting every aspect of the incident. Chen kept shaking his head as he watched the video. "In 15 years of prosecuting these cases," he said, "I've rarely seen evidence this clear or violations this blatant. The video captured everything: the warrantless entry, the illegal search, the assault when Reeves grabbed the phone. Most damaging of all, it captured the racial slurs and the explicit statements about Judge Williams not belonging in her own neighborhood. Within 30 minutes of the officers leaving her property, Judge Williams was on the phone with the FBI. As a federal judge, she had direct access to the Civil Rights Division, and they took her call immediately. Special Agent Maria Santos, who had spent 2 decades investigating police misconduct, listened to the preliminary account and told Judge Williams she'd be there as quickly as possible. This wasn't a case that could wait for the standard intake process. Santos arrived 2 hours later, bringing with her a technical specialist and David Chen, a federal prosecutor who had built his career on civil rights cases. They set up in Judge Williams's living room and began the painstaking work of reviewing the security footage. The technical specialist downloaded the files from the cloud storage, verifying the timestamps and ensuring the chain of custody would hold up in court. Chen and Santos watched in silence as the video played out. Every illegal entry, every unconstitutional search, every racial slur, it was all there in high definition with crystal clear audio. Chen had prosecuted police misconduct for 15 years, but he kept pausing the video, shaking his head in disbelief. The clarity of this evidence, he said finally, it's almost unprecedented. They violated so many laws in such a short period of time. Santos took detailed notes marking timestamps for each violation. The warrantless entry, the assault when Reeves grabbed the phone, the illegal search of personal belongings, the explicit racial statements that established intent. Under federal law specifically, Title 18 U.S.C., Section 242, it's a crime for anyone acting under color of law to willfully deprive a person of their constitutional rights. The video showed exactly that multiple times over. They spent 4 hours documenting everything. Judge Williams walked them through her decision-making process, explaining why she hadn't immediately identified herself and why she'd chosen to let the encounter play out. I wanted to see how they treated someone they thought was powerless, she explained, because if they did this to me, a federal judge, what are they doing to ordinary citizens who don't have my resources or knowledge of the law? That question would prove prophetic in ways none of them yet realized. Meanwhile, officers Reeves and Thompson had returned to their precinct in a state of barely controlled panic. They'd spent the drive back in silence, each man processing the magnitude of their mistake. Back at the station, they tried to act normal, but their sergeant noticed something was off. When he asked if everything was okay, Reeves claimed they just had a difficult call. He didn't mention it was with a federal judge. He didn't mention the illegal entry or the search or the things they'd said. He hoped desperately that somehow it would all just go away. It wouldn't. By Thursday morning, Reeves had started researching exactly who Judge Patricia Williams was, and what he found made his situation infinitely worse. She wasn't just any federal judge. She had presided over multiple police misconduct cases during her decade on the bench. She'd ruled on Fourth Amendment violations, approved search warrants, and sentenced officers who had abused their authority. Her knowledge of constitutional law was thorough, and her reputation for holding law enforcement accountable was well established. They hadn't just targeted a federal judge. They'd targeted the wrong federal judge. But the FBI investigation was just beginning, and what they would uncover would prove this wasn't about 2 individual officers making a mistake. This was about a system that had protected and enabled racist behavior for years. Santos and her team subpoenaed 5 years of departmental records. They analyzed traffic stop data, reviewed complaint files, and interviewed dozens of current and former officers. The pattern that emerged was damning. The data showed that Black residents in affluent neighborhoods were stopped and questioned at rates 17 times higher than white residents in the same areas. Internal emails revealed supervisors making jokes about certain types of people not belonging in nice neighborhoods. Training materials, while never explicitly racist, used coded language that essentially taught officers to view successful Black citizens as inherently suspicious. Officer Reeves's personnel file revealed 12 complaints over 3 years, all alleging racial profiling. One complaint came from a Black neurosurgeon who had been stopped while jogging in his own neighborhood, questioned for 20 minutes, and told he needed to prove he lived there. Another came from a Black family who'd been surrounded by 3 patrol cars while unloading groceries outside their home with officers demanding proof of residency. Every single complaint had been dismissed or resulted in nothing more than a verbal warning. Thompson's record was similarly troubling. 9 complaints in 4 years, all following the same pattern. Black citizens going about their normal lives stopped and questioned because officers decided they looked suspicious. In each case, the department's internal review had found no wrongdoing. Supervisors had protected both officers, prioritizing loyalty to fellow cops over accountability to the community. The system had enabled their behavior, and now that system was about to face federal oversight. The grand jury convened 3 weeks after the incident. 18 citizens heard testimony from Judge Williams, reviewed the security footage, and listened to FBI agents explain the pattern of violations. The deliberation was swift. After just 4 hours, they returned indictments against both officers. Reeves faced 7 federal charges, civil rights violations under color of law, illegal search and seizure, criminal trespass, assault, and conspiracy to deprive civil rights. Thompson faced 6 similar charges. Even though he hadn't initiated the contact, his participation in the illegal search and his failure to stop his partner's obvious misconduct made him equally culpable under federal law. The trial began 6 months later. The courthouse was packed with media representatives, civil rights activists, and community members who'd been waiting years to see officers held accountable. Reeves and Thompson sat at separate defense tables, both looking like men who understood their lives were over. The prosecution's case was devastating in its simplicity. They played the security footage in its entirety, letting the jury watch as 2 officers violated every constitutional principle they'd sworn to uphold. They presented the fabricated suspicious person report that had never actually been made. They called expert witnesses who explained exactly how each action violated federal law. Judge Williams testified for 6 hours over 2 days. She walked the jury through every moment of that morning, describing not just what happened, but what she was thinking and feeling. She explained her decision not to reveal her identity, immediately wanting to see how these officers treated someone they perceived as powerless. She spoke about the fear she felt when armed men invaded her home, the humiliation of being told she didn't belong in her own neighborhood, and the anger she felt listening to racial slurs in her own living room. Her testimony was calm, measured, and utterly devastating. Here was a federal judge, someone who had dedicated her career to upholding the law, describing how 2 officers had trampled on everything she stood for. The defense attorneys tried various strategies to save their clients. Reeves's lawyer argued his client had been following his training and responding to what he genuinely believed was a suspicious situation. That argument collapsed when prosecutors demonstrated that no suspicious person report had ever been made and that Reeves had admitted to fabricating the initial justification for contact. Thompson's attorney claimed his client was simply following his partner's lead and hadn't fully understood what was happening. That defense crumbled when prosecutors played audio of Thompson actively participating in the racial abuse and illegal search, making his own comments about people not belonging. 3 retired officers took the stand to describe a culture of racism within the department and specific incidents where they'd witnessed both defendants targeting Black citizens. One former sergeant testified that he'd tried to report concerns about Reeves and Thompson, but had been told by supervisors to mind his own business and maintain unit cohesion. The message had been clear: loyalty to fellow officers mattered more than accountability to the community. Constitutional law professors walked the jury through Fourth Amendment protections and explained exactly how every action violated established legal standards. The case against both men was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 8 hours across 2 days. When they returned, the verdict was complete, guilty on all counts for both defendants. Reeves was convicted on 7 federal charges. Thompson was convicted on 6. The courtroom erupted when the verdict was read. Family members of other victims wept openly, finally seeing some measure of justice. Judge Williams sat quietly in the front row, showing no emotion outwardly, but clearly vindicated. The defendants' families looked devastated, finally understanding their loved ones were going to federal prison for a very long time. Sentencing came 6 weeks later. Reeves received 5 years in federal custody, 3 years supervised release, and a $75,000 fine. Thompson got 3 years in federal prison, 2 years supervised release, and a $50,000 fine. Both men were banned from ever working in law enforcement again. The civil settlement came separately. Judge Williams sued the city for $3 million, and the city settled within 90 days, knowing they couldn't win at trial with that video evidence. The money wasn't the point for her. The accountability was. The knock on the door came hard and fast at 7:23 in the morning. Judge Patricia Williams had just returned from her jog, still in her athletic wear, looking forward to her coffee before heading to the courthouse. When she opened the door, 2 uniformed officers stood on her porch, hands resting on their belts, blocking her view of the street. "Ma'am, who are you, and what are you doing in this house?" Officer Reeves demanded, his tone leaving no room for pleasantries. Judge Williams paused, coffee mug still in her hand and genuinely confused. "This is my home. What seems to be the problem, officers?" Reeves didn't soften. "We got reports of suspicious activity. I need your ID, now." She asked calmly what legal basis they had for demanding identification at her own front door. Thompson, the second officer, stepped forward with barely concealed impatience. "Just cooperate, ma'am. This'll go a lot easier if you don't make it difficult." What happened next would destroy 2 police careers, trigger a federal investigation that exposed years of systemic racism, and result in the harshest penalties ever imposed for racial profiling in the state's history. The body camera footage and home security video from that Tuesday morning would be viewed millions of times, studied in law schools and police academies, and prove that even federal judges aren't immune to the ugliest forms of prejudice. Judge Patricia Williams was no ordinary target, and these officers were about to make the most expensive mistake of their lives. Have you ever seen someone's entire world collapse in real time because they underestimated the wrong person? Drop a comment if you've witnessed a moment like that, because what you're about to hear will show you exactly what happens when officers let their prejudice override their judgment. Judge Williams wasn't supposed to be home that Tuesday morning. At 62 years old, she had spent the last decade serving as a federal judge appointed during the previous administration. Before that, she'd worked 10 years as a prosecutor, handling cases that ranged from white-collar fraud to civil rights violations. But none of that mattered at 7:15 a.m. when she returned from her morning jog.